My name's Sarah Sutton. I'm one of the liaison librarians over at Carnegie Vincent Library. Today, I am going to be giving you a presentation about how to use and cite sources in a paper. By the end of this presentation, I will be answering four questions. One, why do you need to use sources in your paper? Two, how do you use those sources in your paper? Three, why do you need to cite the sources that you use in your paper? And finally, how do you cite those sources that you use in your paper? So, first, why do you need to use sources? What is their purpose? The answer to that is that a source is typically used for three reasons. One, it serves as evidence. Two, it provides support. And three, it adds credibility. When we talk about a source serving as evidence, we often mean as data. Think statistics. It might be demographic information or measurable trends. You're basically relying on the facts and numbers that somebody else gathers, and then you use them to help prove whatever argument you're trying to make. Another type of evidence you might find in a source are witnesses. This can be actual witnesses from a court case, but it can also be something more like entries from somebody's personal diary or statements from an interview. The thing with the personal observations of witnesses is that they tend to serve as a powerful form of proof, whatever form they take. And whenever you are trying to convince readers of anything, proof is absolutely vital. You need to be able to prove that what you're saying has merit, that it's important and relevant, and above all, that you're not just making stuff up, that you've actually done the research. In addition to serving as evidence, a source can also provide support, and that support that it can provide takes on a number of possible different shapes. For one, it might be what inspires your idea. You might read something that's really interesting, and you find yourself thinking about what it has to say, and before you know it, those thoughts start turning into ideas of your own, and maybe even ideas that you'd like to write about in your own paper. And so that would be a form that a source might take when it supports your ideas. Another way it might support your ideas goes beyond simply inspiring you. It could actually be foundational to your ideas. In other words, your own ideas wouldn't be able to stand on its own without the source. Something in the source is necessary in order for your own ideas to make sense, and to be convincing and to be respected as valid. Then last but not least, a source can add credibility to what you're trying to say. Credibility is one of those things that just takes time to build. We tend to be more willing to listen to someone we think is an expert on a subject, someone who's had many, many years of experience and who is respected by their peers. As we speak, you're working on building your own credibility. That said, you might not have enough yet on your own. That's why you sometimes have to rely on other people's credibility, especially when doing something like writing a paper. Some of your readers might listen to what you have to say without you leaning on those outside sources. A whole lot more will, though, if you do, especially if those sources are considered to have a high level of credibility. That's why, when choosing sources, you want to pay attention to how that source is viewed by others. Is the paper quoted by other experts in the field? Is it published in a respected journal? Is the data and evidence it presents considered valid? You also want to look at the author. Who are they? What level of expertise do they have on the topic they're writing about? How many years of experience do they have in that particular field? What do their peers think of them? Do they just have a few people who agree with them, or are they widely considered to be someone worthy of respect? By relying on the work of someone who is a widely respected expert, you can really give your own work more credibility. It will go a lot further than just hoping that people will rely on your word alone. Okay. So I've talked to you about some of the reasons you should use sources in your paper. Now I'm going to talk to you about how to use them. We'll be covering four different ways you can use a source: quoting, paraphrasing, reproducing, and synthesizing. The first method, quoting, is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's the simplest, and unfortunately, it's also the method you're supposed to use the least. Direct quotes are really only supposed to be used if the way that the quote is worded is so important and you just can't do it justice by putting it into your own words. So, to make sure we're all on the same page, quoting is when you take the words from an outside source and transplant them into your own paper. As a general rule of thumb, no changes should be made to a quote. They are meant to be word for word. That said, if you do need to make minor edits to it, there's a couple ways you can do that. Just make sure the edits you make aren't changing the meaning of the quote. So, let's say you need to make a couple of edits. For example, you might want to switch out a person's name for a pronoun or vice versa. You can do that by using brackets. You will place brackets on each side of the word that has been changed. Or you might want to cut out a few words that aren't really necessary for the sentence. So maybe you just want to get straight to the point. And so you cut out the first extra words of the sentence. You would add an ellipses or the triple dots to the area where you've cut off some words. Um, and so the brackets and the ellipses, what that will do is it will alert your readers to the fact that you have made some minor edits to the quote, but once again, those edits shouldn't be changing the actual meaning of the quote. The other thing you need to know about using direct quotes is that the formatting changes slightly depending on how long the quote is. If the quote is 40 or more words, it becomes something called a block quotation. Unlike with a regular quote, block quotations don't require quotation marks around the quote. They also begin on a new line and are indented. We'll be looking at an example of that in just a moment, but first I want to show you a couple examples of a non-block quotation for comparison. So here we have a couple different examples of what a typical quotation might look like. This first version is called a parenthetical quotation. Parenthetical quotations are full sentences. You don't have to add anything before or after the quote in order for the sentence to stand on its own. When using a parenthetical quotation, it's pretty straightforward. You just place quotation marks at the beginning and ending of the quote, and then you place the citation information after the end quotation marks, and then you put the final punctuation after the end parentheses of the citation information. The other version of a direct quote is called a narrative quotation. This is when the direct quote does not stand on its own. You need to add a few words either to the beginning or the ending of it in order for it to be a standalone sentence. Um, and in that case, the format of the citation information is slightly different. So if you look at the example here, the writer has begun the sentence with the author's name. And so because they've done that, they don't need to add the author's name a second time into the citation information. That's considered to be enough where it is. And so they also place the publication year immediately after the author's last name in its own set of parentheses. And then at the end of the quotation, they add the page numbers in a second set of parentheses. So that's the format it should take. And here is an example of a block quotation. So remember, block quotations are 40 words or longer. As you can see in the example, the block quotation begins on a new line from the rest of the sentence and is indented. In addition to that, it has no quotation marks surrounding the quotation. And then the citation information is left at the end of the quote, just like with a regular quotation. The other small difference to note is that the punctuation to end the quotation does not go after the citation information like with a non-block quote. It just goes at the end of the final sentence. Okay. So that's quoting. Next, we're going to talk about paraphrasing. The biggest difference between quoting and paraphrasing is that a paraphrase should be all your own words. So they're not word for word like a direct quote, and they're also not a quote that's been slightly edited where you've just changed out a few words. A paraphrase should actually be mostly, if not entirely, your own words. Um, and so it should just be summing up whatever idea or point the source you're pulling from is making. Just remember the key to a good paraphrase is making sure that your words faithfully convey the paraphrased material's original meaning. You don't want to make any changes to it that would twist the meaning so that it says something that the original author did not intend. Okay, so here are a few examples of paraphrases. In this first slide, you can see the original passage, and then underneath it, you see an example of a good paraphrase. So in the good paraphrase, you can see that the paraphrase is hardly using any of the same words as the material being paraphrased, yet the idea, the meaning of the original passage comes through just fine. Okay, on this next slide, we have a couple more examples. The first one is just an okay paraphrase. The writer has done the bare minimum. They have summarized the original material, but they haven't really done anything with it. So it's technically correct, it's just not very good. And then finally, we have a bad example. One problem with this example is that it's more like an edited quote than a true paraphrase. If you compare it to the original passage, you'll see that most of the words are the same. They've just tweaked a few things here and there. But the real problem with this one is that there's no citation information. And because there is no citation information, this would be considered a plagiarized passage. Because of the form it currently takes, it almost looks like the writer is presenting this as their own idea. Now, that may not be their intent, but we know that this idea is not theirs. And so, because they haven't given credit to the person whose idea this belongs to, it's considered plagiarism. So, when doing a paraphrase, you might not need to put quotation marks around it to let your readers know it's a quote, but you definitely need the citation information. So definitely don't forget to add that. Okay, so what if you want to use a source that isn't something you can quote or paraphrase? Maybe you want to include a graph in your essay, or maybe you want to include a picture, or like in a presentation, you might be including clips from a video. These aren't really something that you would be they're not in a verbal form or a written form. So because of that, the rules are a little bit different. When you are working to with a source of this type, it's called reproducing the source. You're basically making a copy of it and putting it into your work. Um, the biggest rule to keep in mind when reproducing a source is that you need to know the copyright information, and then you have to get permission to do this from the copyright owner. So for example, if I wanted to include a copy of a comic strip from Calvin and Hobbes in something I was working on, I would have to contact Bill Watterson or his lawyers and get them to say that, yes, you can use this in your work before I would legally be allowed to include it. If I were to do that without getting permission, I could get in a lot of trouble. So then let's say I got permission, what you would then do is so you'd have the picture or graph in your essay, and then you would follow it with citation information as well as a statement that you have received permission to use it. Okay, now for the final method. The final method of using a source is called synthesis. Synthesis is generally considered the best method for using a source. Synthesis goes far beyond simply quoting or summarizing what someone else says and finding a place to just fit it into your paper. In addition to doing those things, synthesis involves you evaluating and interpreting the information and then drawing your own conclusions about it. You don't just pick out a line or two and that fits what you want to say. You look at the source as a whole. You decide your opinion on what's being said in it. You determine where it fits into the grander scheme of the research field. Then you take it into in a new direction that melds with your own ideas. And if it sounds difficult, that's because it is. But if you want to write a truly good research paper, synthesis is the goal to aim for. Because when synthesis is done right, nobody needs to question whether or not you've done your research. It's going to be crystal clear that you've put a great deal of thought and work into it. So here's a couple examples of synthesis. This time we'll start with the bad example. It's not plagiarized, so that's good, but they really didn't do a good job with the synthesis. They've really done is taken three essays and written a one-line summary of each of them and strung them together. So technically it counts as synthesis, but it's badly done. And it's not just because they only summarize the three. Like, we don't know why they're summarizing it. Like, what's the point? Where's the context? Why did they decide to include this here? So we have no clue what the writer's intent is. And then they don't make any evaluation of them. They've just put the summary. So I have no clue what they think of these three essays. Are they good? Are they bad? And why did they put them in here? And what was their intent? What are they getting from it? None of those questions are answered in this example. In the second example, we have a better example of synthesis. We have all the things we need. We have the context. I can see why the author has selected these articles to write about. They are each examples of research on the barriers to second language acquisition. And then after mentioning the articles, the writer goes on to tell us what they think of the articles and that they are good, they have merit, but that something is missing. And then the writer tells us that they have drawn the conclusion that more research is needed. So, um, so this is a much better example of what you are trying to do when you are synthesizing. All right. So we've talked about why you need to use sources and how to use them. Now we're going to talk about why you need to cite the sources you use. There are four major reasons for this. Number one, it avoids plagiarism. That's a big one. Number two, it gives credit to the author. Three, it supports your ideas. And four, it helps others to locate information. So let's start with the big one, avoiding plagiarism. This is definitely something you want to avoid. For those of you who might not be aware, plagiarism is essentially theft. Rather than physically taking something like money or bicycle or a painting, though, plagiarism is the theft of ideas. It's also the theft of any credit for those ideas. So, for example, you basically claim that someone else's idea or creation is your own, or you present something as if it is your own. Because you don't necessarily have to say, this is my idea for it to qualify as plagiarism. By simply writing about an idea and then failing to tell people that it's not your idea, that it's someone else's, it's basically you automatically falsely presenting the idea as your own. Which is why plagiarism can sometimes be a very easy pit to fall into. Most people really don't mean to plagiarize. They just forget to give credit to the person who came up with the idea. And sometimes knowing when you need to give credit is a little tricky. It's not always obvious when the thoughts in our head aren't actually originally ours, that they come from somewhere else. And even when you do know that the idea isn't your own original thought, it's not always easy to figure out where it came from, who came up with it. You sometimes have to spend some time hunting down that information. And of course, then you start getting into the ownership of ideas and things get really tricky. Like, did you know that you can technically plagiarize yourself? Yes, really. This is especially true in the sciences. If a scientist comes up with a product or a theory while they are employed with the university or a company, the product or theory they've come up with does not belong to the scientist. It belongs to their employer. Same goes for any research that they publish about that product or theory. It is considered to be the property of the employer, not the individual who actually wrote the paper. So, let's say that scientist leaves their employer, but then goes on to do more research and they want to cite something from that paper they wrote before. Well, if they don't cite it, even though they are the one who wrote it, they can be hit for plagiarism. They need to give credit to the company. And it can sound kind of silly, but people have gotten in trouble for this before, so it's something to be aware of. And it is a really messy thing, but it's also very important to be aware of because the consequences of plagiarism are real. It's not always just a bad grade on an essay. People have lost jobs, they've been charged with heavy fines, even had jail time. If you want an example of how bad it can get, just look up Harvard's ex-president. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's technically possible you might just get away with a slap on the wrist, but if you plagiarize the wrong person, it can go very badly. So I highly recommend just going ahead and putting in the extra work and making sure you give credit to the right people. So, if the law isn't enough to convince you, another reason to cite sources is because it's just the right thing to do. Creators deserve to be credited for their creations. If you have ever created something, whether it's a drawing or a blanket or a book, then you know firsthand just how much time and effort and money it can take to create those things. For example, I like to crochet stuffed animals, and I can't tell you how much money I have spent on yarn, on crochet hooks, on patterns. It's quite a bit, probably more than I should. But and then that's just the money side of things. Like I have spent hundreds of hours making stuffed animals. One of my stuffed animals probably took me 80 hours. It was a lot of time. I had fun doing it. But if somebody were to decide to say that they had made my stuffed animal that I had spent 80 hours on, I would not like that very much. That would be really unkind. And that would hurt me a lot. And see, for me, making stuffed animals is a hobby but for some creators, this is their livelihood. Like this is how they pay the bills. And so when somebody steals credit for their work, they're not just being a jerk, they're actually stealing potential money and customers and the reputation that this creator should have gotten. I have known creators who were so financially or personally hurt by somebody stealing their work that they decide never to do that again. Like they just gave up. And sometimes it's because they just couldn't afford to lose money like that again. But other times it's because they were just so hurt and they don't want to face that pain again. Um, and so just keep in mind, it's truly unkind and harmful to not give credit where credit is due. And I know some of us do this without intending to cause harm, but it's something to be aware of and to try to be conscientious about when you are creating your own work, especially if you are borrowing from other people. So, yes, please do the right thing. If you are going to share someone else's idea, please make sure to let people know whose idea it really is and maybe help them get some more customers. I'm sure they would really appreciate that. Okay, so flawed morality won't sway you, then maybe this third reason will. One thing you should know is that when you publish a paper, citing other people's work benefits you. I've already talked quite a bit about how relying on other people's credibility can boost your own, so we're not going to go into that again. There's actually another more concrete way that the reference list can benefit you and you may not be aware of. So think of your reference list as a map. When someone reads your paper and decides they want to know more, they can use your reference list to find what other people have said about the same topic. You've given them the title, the author name, the publishing information. So they could just take that information and go find those other works. Even better, though, your paper becomes a citation for every single source that you include in that reference list, which means you are not only helping your readers find other people's work, you are also making it easier for new readers to find yours. So let me show you what I am talking about. Okay, this is the library's website, library.lmunet.edu. We are going to go to the databases. You can just click on this A to Z right here. The database I'm looking for is called Web of Science. So we're just going to click on the W, and it's the first one in the list. So I'm going to open this up. Okay. So, this is Web of Science, a database you have free access to through the library. And one of Web of Science's most useful functions is that it indexes all the references and citations for millions of scholarly publications. Basically, what that means is you can search for a publication and see not only its reference list, you can also see a list of any publications that have cited it. So let's say I do a search real quick. It's already got it in there for me. Okay, so you'll see there's this list of papers that are by this particular author. And one thing I want you to look for is over here on the right-hand side, you have a couple different numbers, citations and references. So if we scroll down to this second article, we see it has 22 citations and 82 references. So what that means is that this one paper has a reference list that is 82 items long. That's gigantic. But even better, the 22 citations, that means that 22 other publications have cited this article. So if I go to the 22 citations, I can see which publications decided to reference this particular work. And that's pretty cool. But what that also means is that all these readers were able to find that paper because they were referenced in these other papers. So yes, please benefit yourself by citing other people because that will help new readers find you. Okay, now for our final question. How do you cite the sources that you've decided to use? So the first thing to know is that every source must be cited in two places. One is the in-text citation, and this will actually go in the paragraph with your quote or paraphrase or synthesis or whatever. And then on your references page. So, in-text citations need to include a few pieces of information. Number one is the author's last name. That's a must-have. Now, not all sources are going to have a last name for you to use, but it might be a group name, a company, an organization, a government body. Whatever it is, that information is going to be included in the in-text citation, followed by the year of publication. And again, not all sources are going to have a specific year of publication. And in that case, you're going to put an N dot D dot for no date. But you're still going to have that space filled where you're indicating the year of publication. And then finally, if you are using a direct quote, you're also going to include any page numbers. So here are some examples of in-text citations and how they should look. in your paper. We've got a few different types of examples. We've got one author, two author, three or more, and so on. And the other thing to pay attention to is they give you examples for both the parenthetical type as well as the narrative type. So that's something that can be useful. Okay, so here are some more specific examples. This is one that does not need a page number. So, for example, you might be citing a website, and so a lot of times those don't have page numbers. So your citation will just have the author's last name and the year it was published. And then here is an example with the page number. Once again, you have the author's last name, then the publication year, followed by the page number. And if you're working with a source where maybe you quoted from something that covered more than one page, you would just have it be two P's instead of one, and then you would have a dash between the page numbers. Okay, so that's what an in-text citation looks like. Now for the reference list. So the reference list is definitely it definitely requires a lot more work. In addition to the author name and the year of publication and any page numbers it might have, you also have to include the title of the work that you are citing and any source information about it. And source information is basically anything about who published the information. And what that information is changes depending on what type of work you are citing. And we're going to go through a few different examples. So let's say you are citing an article from a journal. Well, then the journal is the source. And so you would need to include the title of the journal, the volume and issue number, and then any page numbers. If you were citing a book, then the source information would be the publisher of the book. If you were citing a chapter from a book, like maybe it's an edited work where each chapter is written by a different author, then you would include source information about the book itself. So that would not only be the publisher of the book, that would also be whoever edited the whole book, and the title of the book, in addition to the title of the chapter. And then if you are working with a web page, the source would be the website that that page is a part of. Okay, so here are some more specific examples of each type of citation. The first one is for an article in a journal. You have the author's last name followed by the initials of their first and middle name. This is followed by the year that the article is published, and then the title of the article. A couple things to note. One, the title of the article is not italicized. Also, the first word and then the word immediately following the colon are capitalized, but no other words in the title are capitalized. Now, if there had been no colon, then the only word that would have been capitalized was measuring. All of the other ones would have been lowercase. After the title of the article, you have the title of the journal. This one is italicized, and all of the words that would typically be capitalized are capitalized. It is followed by the volume and issue number, and then the page numbers. The next example we have is of a book, and this one is much simpler. Once again, you have the author's last name and first initial, followed by the year it was published. You have the title of the book, which is italicized, and only the first word is capitalized. And then you have the name of the publisher. Then, in our next example, we have a chapter from a larger book where the chapter has been written by one person, but the book has been edited by different people. So you start off with the author of the chapter's name, followed by the year it was published, then the name of the chapter, which is not italicized and only the first word is capitalized. Then you have information about the book it was published in, including you starting with the editor's names and then the title of the book, and then the page numbers, and finally the company that published it. And then our last example is of a web page. So note here that we do not have an individual's name, we have an organization. Sometimes you're going to run into sources like that, and so you are going to place the organization's name where the author's name would be, followed by the year it was published, the title of the web page that you are citing from, and then the title of the website as a whole, followed by the URL. Okay, so let's say you're working on your paper and you're starting to work on the references list and you can't remember all of this information. Where do you go to get this information? So a few basic resources you should know about. These are all free to use, and I highly recommend all of them. The first one is APA's website. So this is the organization that publishes the manual and makes up all these rules. They actually have quite a bit of material available for free on their website, and that includes some information about the rules as well as a few examples. Another good resource is Purdue OWL. This is another free website. It is run by Purdue University. They include once again, a lot of information about the basics when it comes to citations and references lists. And they also give a lot of really nice examples on there, and I use Purdue OWL quite a bit. And then, of course, our library website, if you go to the SOSLib guide, we have a section on there that is devoted to the APA formatting. And there's a lot of really good information on there too. But let's say you're dealing with a citation that is more complicated than any of the examples that they give on the website and on Purdue OWL or any of the free resources. You do have a couple of other options. Number one is the APA manual itself. This is basically the rule book, and they cover just about every possible type of source you could possibly want to use in your paper. And it gives you all the rules, it gives you all the examples. But you might not have a personal copy at home, but that's okay. We have several free copies at the library that we keep behind the front desk. Anyone can come in and use them. And then, of course, you have us, the librarians. We are more than happy to work with you on your paper. You can come in and make an appointment, and we will sit down with you and make sure that your citations are all formatted correctly. We'll take a look at your references list and make sure that looks good. So please feel free to come by the library. Okay, that's it for my presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at any time. And if you would like any assistance with finding sources for your paper or getting your references list into shape, I would be happy to schedule an appointment with you. Just call or email me and we will set something up. Okay, have a great day.